Why did Kim Taehyung, the globally adored V from BTS, break down so suddenly, and why has no one spoken about it until now? What could possibly shake one of the most composed idols in the world to the point of emotional collapse? And what did Jungkook, the youngest member of the group, do in that silent, heartbreaking moment that has left even the most loyal fans in complete shock? It was a quiet evening in Seoul, one of those rare moments when the cameras were off, the lights dimmed, and the members of BTS were left to themselves. No performances, no screaming crowds, no pressure to be perfect idols. But it was on this seemingly ordinary night that everything changed, when years of buried emotion rose to the surface in a way no one had expected. It began with a simple conversation. The members had gathered in the dorm's living room, surrounded by old photos, half-eaten takeout, and the kind of laughter that only exists between brothers. But beneath the smiles, something was stirring inside Taehyung. Something deep, something painful. According to an unnamed source close to the group, Taehyung had been quieter than usual for weeks. Though he smiled on stage and engaged with fans as always, there were moments, small, fleeting ones, where his expression faltered, where his eyes looked lost. Jungkook, always perceptive when it comes to his hyungs, had noticed that night, as the others drifted off to their rooms, Jungkook stayed behind with Taehyung. The two shared a silence that wasn't awkward but heavy. Then, out of nowhere, Taehyung asked a question that made Jungkook freeze. "Do you ever feel like we gave everything and forgot who we were before all of this?" The words hung in the air like smoke, refusing to fade. Jungkook looked at him, really looked, and saw something he hadn't seen in years. Vulnerability. Real, raw, unfiltered pain. It wasn't about fame. It wasn't about the music or the schedules or even the fans. It was about identity, about sacrifice. That was the moment it happened. Taehyung's voice cracked as he tried to explain, to make Jungkook understand the weight he'd been carrying. The pressure to always smile. The fear of letting anyone down. The loneliness of standing in front of thousands while feeling completely alone inside. His hands trembled. His shoulders shook. And then, silently at first, the tears came. He broke down. Not like in dramas. Not like on stage. This was different. There was no script, no camera to catch his good side. Just Taehyung, the boy from Daegu, crying in the dim light of their dorm, everything he'd held in finally pouring out. And that's when Jungkook did something that no one expected. He didn't say a word. He didn't rush to comfort him with cliches or promises he couldn't keep. Instead, he sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched, and simply began to sing a soft, almost whisper-like melody. A song Taehyung used to love when they were trainees. A lullaby from their youth, back when things were simpler. And as he sang, something in Taehyung shifted. He looked at Jungkook, eyes wide with disbelief. Not because of the song, but because in that moment, Jungkook wasn't just a bandmate. He wasn't just the golden magne. He was his brother, his anchor, and that's when the truth began to unravel. A truth that had been buried under years of fame, fortune, and fanfare. A secret that only the two of them knew. Until now. But before we uncover what really triggered Taehyung's breakdown and the deeper story behind Jungkook's silent act of love, we need to go back. To the beginning. To the days before the stadiums and the awards. To the moment these two boys met, and the bond they formed that would one day become unbreakable, because what Jungkook did for Taehyung that night wasn't just comforting. It was redemption. It was a promise. And it all started years ago, with one quiet moment that no one noticed until now. What if the moment that shaped their unbreakable bond happened before either of them ever realized it? What if fate had already chosen their story, long before fame carved their names into history? Before the cameras, before the global stage, before armies around the world screamed their names, there was just a quiet boy from Busan and another from Daegu, both carrying dreams too big for their small hometowns. It was the year 2011 when Jungkook stepped into the big hit building for the first time. He was only 13. shy, wide-eyed, and unsure of the world he was entering. He had no idea what the future held. No idea he would soon meet someone who would forever change his life. Back then, Taehyung was just another trainee, still figuring out his place in the world. The two were strangers, but something clicked. They didn't become friends instantly. In fact, their first few encounters were awkward at best. Jungkook was the youngest, unsure of how to interact with older trainees, and Taehyung was mysterious, unpredictable, and somehow always dancing between silence and mischief. But in the chaos of training rooms, sleepless nights, vocal drills, and shared meals, something began to bloom. A quiet understanding. Taehyung noticed how Jungkook pushed himself too hard. How he stayed after practice until his body couldn't move. How he masked his fear of failure with jokes and laughter. Jungkook, in turn, saw through Taehyung's playful facade. He saw a boy who missed his family, who longed to be understood, who cried alone in the bathroom after a tough evaluation. They never said it out loud, but they started looking out for each other. Taehyung would sneak extra snacks into Jungkook's bag. Jungkook would secretly clean up after Taehyung when he was too tired to move. These were small things, but they meant everything. And in those early days of uncertainty, those acts became a language, a bond. The moment they truly became inseparable, though, came one night during winter. The heaters in the dorm had broken down. It was freezing. The older trainees were out, and it was just Jungkook and Taehyung left. Jungkook curled up in a corner with 3 layers of blankets. But Taehyung, instead of complaining, grabbed his guitar and started playing. He sang quietly at first. A song Jungkook didn't know but instantly felt in his chest. Without a word, Jungkook sat beside him. For hours, they didn't speak. They just sang. That night, something changed. Not in a dramatic, movie-like way, but in a silent, unforgettable shift. They were no longer just trainees. They were brothers. From that moment, Jungkook stopped calling him just Hyung. He started calling him Taehyung. And Taehyung, in turn, started calling Jungkook Kooky with a warmth that only grew stronger with time. Years later, fans would marvel at their chemistry on stage, their endless inside jokes, their subtle glances. But what they never saw was this: the cold winter night, the broken heater, the quiet song, and 2 boys who found home in each other. And it's this bond, this unspoken, years-old connection, that would resurface years later when Taehyung broke down. That night in the dorm wasn't an accident. It was the inevitable moment when everything they had built finally came full circle. But what happened in between? What trials tested their loyalty? What heartbreaks almost tore them apart? You'll want to know what nearly shattered their bond before Jungkook made a decision that shocked everyone, including Taehyung himself. What could make the bond between Taehyung and Jungkook, something that had withstood years of pressure, fame, and hidden pain, start to fray? What invisible wound had begun to grow, slowly and silently, until it threatened to break everything they had built? Fans only saw the smiles, the shared laughter, the flawless performances. But behind the scenes, a storm was forming, and no one saw it coming. It started subtly. The schedules were packed tighter than ever. World tours, recording sessions, interviews across continents. It was the golden era of BTS, when everything they touched turned to gold. But with success came exhaustion, and with exhaustion came distance. Jungkook had begun exploring solo projects. His talent was undeniable: vocals, dance, even producing. The world began watching him with new eyes, not just as the golden magne, but as a future legend in his own right. Meanwhile, Taehyung, too, was carving his own path: his deep baritone, his cinematic solo releases, his art. But with individual success came an unintended consequence: space. They were still close. Or so it seemed. They still smiled on camera, still joked in interviews. But something was off. Jungkook had stopped texting Taehyung late at night, something they used to do religiously. Taehyung, once always the first to notice if Jungkook skipped a meal or looked tired, now seemed caught up in his own world. Then came the rehearsal incident. IT was for an award show performance. High stakes, globally broadcasted, with millions watching. The choreography was grueling, the timeline tight. Tensions were high. According to one insider, during a late-night practice, Taehyung made a mistake during a complex routine. Jungkook, exhausted and frustrated, said something under his breath. Something sharp. Something he didn't mean. Maybe if you actually cared about practice more than your solo shoots. The room fell silent. Taehyung froze. He didn't yell. He didn't cry. He just looked at Jungkook like he didn't recognize him. Then he walked out. That night, for the first time in years, they slept in separate rooms. The tension lingered. Taehyung became quieter. Jungkook busied himself with work. The other members noticed, of course. Namjoon tried to mediate. Jimin, who was close to both, tried to get them to talk. But pride had taken root. And pride, when mixed with pain, creates a wall even love struggles to break. Online, fans began speculating. Edits and fan cams decreased. The once inseparable Taehyung seemed distant. Interviews were more formal, glances fewer. Something was changing, and fast. But what fans didn't know was that the problem ran deeper than just one comment. In a private interview, years later, Taehyung would admit something that stunned even the staff. It wasn't what Jungkook said. It was that, for a moment, I believed he meant it. That hurt more than anything.
And Jungkook?
When asked about their hardest time as a group, he said quietly, "There was a moment where I thought I'd lost my best friend, and I didn't know how to fix it. The pain was real, but so was the love. And that's what made everything so complicated. Because even when anger burned, their bond was still there, beneath the silence, beneath the distance. Waiting, and it would take a shocking twist, something neither of them expected, to finally bring everything back to the surface, a moment so raw, so unscripted, that it would force both of them to confront what truly mattered. What was that moment? What shattered the silence between them? What did Jungkook do that left even Taehyung speechless? How do you apologize when words aren't enough? How do you reach someone when time and pride have built a wall too high to climb? And what if that person used to be your entire world? The moment arrived not during a concert, not during a scheduled meeting, but in the most unexpected of places, a hospital. Taehyung's grandmother, whom he had always referred to as one of his life anchors, fell seriously ill. It was sudden. One morning she was fine. By the evening, Taehyung received the call that she was in critical condition.
No cameras. No glamour.
Just fear, raw and overwhelming. He left immediately. No goodbye, no explanations. The members understood. But Jungkook? He didn't hear it from Taehyung himself. For days, no word came. The group was rehearsing in Japan, preparing for a massive stadium performance. Taehyung was in Daegu, by her side in a small hospital room. Jungkook found out through staff. And something in him shifted. He remembered the nights Taehyung stayed up with him when he was homesick. He remembered the words Taehyung had once said when Jungkook's grandfather passed. Grief is the price of love, but we pay it together. Jungkook left rehearsal, without notifying management, without planning, without bodyguards. He flew to Daegu. Alone. Fans didn't know. The media didn't catch it. But a nurse later anonymously shared a story that would go viral years later. That a young man in a hoodie sat quietly outside the ICU ward, waiting. That he brought food but didn't go in. That he sat there until 3 a.m., had bowed, unread messages piling up on his phone. It was Taehyung who finally walked out. He didn't expect Jungkook to be there. He didn't know how to react. For a second, they just stared at each other. Two people who had once shared everything and now felt like strangers. But then Jungkook stood, and with trembling hands, he pulled out something from his jacket pocket. A drawing, hand-sketched, rough lines, almost childlike. It was of Taehyung's grandmother, smiling, sitting in her garden. It wasn't perfect, but it was hers. Taehyung's breath hitched. "I remembered the photo you showed me once," Jungkook said, his voice cracking. I wanted to give it to her. In case. I didn't get to say goodbye. Taehyung didn't say anything.
He couldn't.
He just took the drawing with both hands, eyes glassy. They sat on the hospital bench, not speaking for a long time. But silence, this time, was no longer painful. It was healing. That night, Jungkook didn't go back to Seoul. He stayed in Daegu, slept in the waiting room chair. Taehyung rested with his head on his shoulder. The next day, when the group returned from rehearsal, the members were stunned to see a photo in their private group chat. Taehyung and Jungkook smiling together outside the hospital, arms around each other. Captioned with just 3 words, "We talked." Finally, that one act, Jungkook flying across the country without fanfare, without pride, had shattered the wall between them. And fans, though they didn't know the full story yet, began noticing something different. A glance during an award show. Taehyung fixing Jungkook's mic, Jungkook calling Taehyung "my brother" in an interview. The energy had shifted. The bond was visible again, but even that wasn't the climax, because what Jungkook did next, during one of BTS's most watched performances, would leave millions in tears, including Taehyung, and it wasn't planned. It wasn't rehearsed. It came from the heart.